The rain fell steadily on the black umbrellas gathered around the grave. Marcus Chen stood near the back of the crowd, his detective instincts never truly at rest, even at his former colleague's funeral. Richard Hartley had been a good man, or so everyone believed. The accounting firm where they'd both worked was closing for the day to honor his memory. Marcus watched the widow, Eleanor Hartley, as she stood beside the polished mahogany casket. She wore the expected black dress, her face hidden behind a delicate veil. Everything about the scene was perfectly ordinary, perfectly appropriate for such a somber occasion. Yet something felt wrong. The priest's voice droned on, speaking of Richard's dedication to his family and his impeccable character. Marcus had worked with Richard for 5 years before leaving to become a private investigator. Richard had been quiet, methodical, the kind of person who color-coded his files and never missed a deadline, not the kind of person who usually ended up dead at 52 from a sudden heart attack. As the priest finished his words, people began stepping forward to place white roses on the casket. Marcus noticed how Eleanor's shoulders shook with what appeared to be grief. Her sister, Patricia, stood beside her, one arm wrapped protectively around Eleanor's waist. The two women looked strikingly similar with their blonde hair and delicate features, though Patricia was several years younger. It was then that Marcus saw it. As Eleanor bent to place her rose on the casket, her veil shifted slightly in the wind. For just a moment, he caught a glimpse of her face, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Eleanor Hartley was smiling, not a sad smile of remembrance or a brave smile fighting through tears. It was a smile of pure satisfaction, quickly hidden as she adjusted her veil. Marcus felt his investigative instincts kick into high gear. He'd seen many grieving spouses in his career, and he'd learned to read the subtle signs of genuine emotion versus performance. This was definitely a performance. The funeral continued, but Marcus found himself studying the other mourners. Richard's business partner, James Morrison, stood stiffly near the front, his face a mask of professional sorrow. The company's young secretary, Linda, was crying openly, which seemed genuine enough. She'd always been emotional, Marcus remembered. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus lingered. He watched Eleanor accept condolences, her voice appropriately broken and weak, but he noticed how her eyes remained dry behind the veil, how her hands were perfectly steady as she clutched her handkerchief. Marcus Chen? A voice interrupted his observations. He turned to see David Park, another former colleague from the accounting firm. David, Marcus nodded. Terrible business. Shocking, really, David said, lowering his voice. Richard seemed so healthy. He just had his annual physical last month. Clean bill of health, he told me. This information made Marcus's instincts sharper. A healthy man doesn't just drop dead from a heart attack. He made a mental note to look into this further. As they talked, Marcus kept one eye on Eleanor. She was now speaking with the funeral director, nodding at something he was saying. Patricia hovered nearby, occasionally touching Eleanor's arm in a gesture of support that seemed almost possessive. Did Richard seem worried about anything lately? Marcus asked David casually. David frowned, thinking. Now that you mention it, he had been acting strange the past few weeks, more secretive than usual. I caught him on several hushed phone calls. When I asked if everything was all right, he just said he was dealing with some personal matters. Personal matters. In Marcus's experience, that phrase could cover a multitude of sins. He thanked David and made his way slowly toward his car, his mind racing. That smile haunted him. He'd seen killers smile like that, people who thought they'd gotten away with the perfect crime. As he reached his car, Marcus made a decision. Richard Hartley deserved justice, and if there was something suspicious about his death, Marcus would find it. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call to his contact at the police department. "Tony, it's Marcus. Listen, I need you to pull the autopsy report on Richard Hartley. Yes, the accountant who died last week. I know it was ruled natural causes, but humor me. Thanks, I owe you one." As he drove away from the cemetery, Marcus glanced in his rearview mirror. Eleanor and Patricia were getting into a black town car, and just before Eleanor disappeared inside, she looked directly at Marcus's retreating vehicle. Even from that distance, he could swear she was still smiling. That night, Marcus sat in his small office surrounded by newspapers and his laptop. He'd started building a file on Richard Hartley, gathering every piece of public information he could find. Richard had been married to Eleanor for 20 years. No children. They lived in a modest suburban home, nothing flashy despite Richard's senior position at the firm. His phone buzzed. Tony had sent him the autopsy report. As Marcus read through it, his frown deepened. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but there were some unusual notes. The medical examiner had found traces of an unknown substance in Richard's blood, but it had been dismissed as likely from a supplement or medication. No further testing had been ordered. Marcus leaned back in his chair. An unknown substance. A healthy man who suddenly dies. A wife who smiles at his funeral. The pieces were starting to form a pattern, but he needed more information. He pulled up Eleanor Hartley's social media profiles. Her recent posts were full of grief and loss, perfectly crafted messages about losing her beloved husband. But as Marcus scrolled back further, he noticed something interesting. About 6 months ago, the tone of her posts had changed. Where once she'd shared happy couple photos and anniversary messages, there was nothing. A stark absence of Richard from her online life. His investigation was interrupted by a knock at his door. Marcus glanced at the clock. It was past 10 at night. He wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, he approached the door and looked through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, looking nervously over her shoulder. It was Linda, the secretary from Richard's firm. Marcus opened the door. "Linda, what are you doing here?" "Mr. Chen, I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said, her voice trembling. "But I heard you were at the funeral today, and I know you used to be a detective. I need to tell someone about Mr. Hartley." Marcus ushered her inside, noting her frightened demeanor. She sat on the edge of the chair he offered, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "What about Richard?" Marcus asked gently. Linda took a shaky breath. I think something bad happened to him. Not natural causes like they're saying." "Why do you think that?" "Because of what I overheard 2 weeks before he died," Linda said, her eyes filling with tears. "I was working late, and Mr. Hartley was still in his office. I went to ask him something, but I heard him on the phone. He was angry, really angry. I'd never heard him like that before." "What was he saying?" "He said, 'I know what you've been doing. Did you think I wouldn't find out? 20 years of marriage, and this is what I get?'" Linda paused, wringing her hands. "Then he said something about lawyers and divorce papers." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Divorce. That changed everything. "Did you hear who he was talking to?" Linda shook her head. "No, but the next day, Mrs. Hartley came to the office. They went into his office and closed the door. I could hear raised voices, but I couldn't make out the words. When she left, she looked triumphant, and Mr. Hartley looked defeated." "Did you tell the police about this?" "I tried," Linda said bitterly, "but they said it didn't matter. Natural causes, they kept saying. Case closed. But Mr. Chen, I knew Mr. Hartley. He was a good man. He didn't deserve whatever happened to him." Marcus thanked Linda for her courage in coming forward and assured her he would look into it. After she left, he sat back down at his desk, the pieces of the puzzle becoming clearer. Richard had discovered something about Eleanor, something that made him angry enough to consider divorce. 2 weeks later, he was dead. But what had Richard discovered? And how had Eleanor managed to kill him in a way that looked like natural causes? Marcus pulled up his search engine and began researching poisons that could mimic heart attack symptoms. There were several, some of which would be difficult to detect in a standard autopsy. But they all required access and knowledge. Eleanor was a housewife with no medical background, unless she had help. Marcus thought about Patricia, always hovering near Eleanor, always touching her, supporting her. The sisterly devotion seemed excessive. And then there was that smile, that satisfied smile at the funeral. He needed to dig deeper into both sisters' backgrounds. But as he reached for his keyboard, his office phone rang. The caller ID showed a blocked number. "Marcus Chen," he answered. "Mr. Chen," a woman's voice said smoothly, "I heard you were asking questions about Richard Hartley's death." Marcus recognized the voice immediately. It was Eleanor Hartley. "Mrs. Hartley," he said carefully, "I'm sorry for your loss." "Are you?" she asked, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Because it seems like you're more interested in causing trouble than offering condolences. I'm just concerned that Richard's death might not have been from natural causes." There was a pause. Then Eleanor laughed, a cold sound that made Marcus grip the phone tighter. "Mr. Chen, my husband is dead and buried. The police are satisfied. The medical examiner is satisfied. Everyone is satisfied except, apparently, you." Her voice hardened. "I'd hate for your curiosity to lead you into trouble. After all, accidents can happen to anyone, even private investigators." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, his mind racing. That wasn't a grieving widow. That was a threat. Eleanor Hartley had just confirmed his suspicions. She was involved in her husband's death, and she was warning him to back off. But Marcus had never backed down from a case, especially when he knew an innocent person had been murdered. He saved his files, backed them up to his cloud storage, and prepared for what he knew would be a dangerous investigation. As he locked up his office and headed home, Marcus didn't notice the black town car parked across the street, or the two figures inside watching his every move. Eleanor Hartley's smile had been just the beginning. The real mystery was about to unfold, and Marcus Chen was walking straight into a web of deception that went deeper than he could imagine. Marcus woke up the next morning to find his car tires slashed, all four of them cut with surgical precision. The message was clear, but it only strengthened his resolve. He called a tow truck and then phoned Tony at the police department. "Someone's trying to scare me off the Hartley case," he told his friend. "What Hartley case?" Tony asked. "That was ruled natural causes, Marcus. You need to let this go." "Can't do that, Tony. The widow threatened me last night, and now this. Something's not right." Tony sighed heavily. "Look, meet me for coffee in an hour. There's something you should know about the Hartley family." They met at a small diner on the outskirts of town. Tony looked around nervously before sliding a thin folder across the table. "This is off the record," Tony said quietly. "Patricia Morrison, Eleanor's sister, has a record." Marcus opened the folder, his eyes widening. Patricia had been arrested twice for fraud, though charges were dropped both times due to lack of evidence. More interesting was her employment history. She'd worked at a pharmaceutical company for 3 years before being quietly terminated. "Pharmaceutical company," Marcus muttered. "That's how they got the poison." "We don't know there was any poison," Tony warned. "But I'll admit, the unknown substance in Hartley's blood is troubling. The ME wanted to run more tests, but the body was cremated quickly. Eleanor insisted on it." "Destroying evidence," Marcus said. "Tony, Richard found out something about Eleanor 2 weeks before he died. He was talking about divorce. Then suddenly he's dead, and his widow is smiling at his funeral." Tony looked uncomfortable. "Even if you're right, without a body, without evidence, there's nothing we can do officially." After Tony left, Marcus decided to approach this from a different angle. He drove to Richard's accounting firm, hoping to find more clues in Richard's office. The building was modern glass and steel, and Marcus still had friends inside who might help. He found David Park in the break room. After some small talk, Marcus casually asked, "Is Richard's office still intact?" David nodded. "Eleanor was supposed to come clear it out, but she hasn't yet. Management's been respectful, giving her time to grieve." "Mind if I take a look? Richard borrowed a book from me months ago, and I'd like to get it back." David hesitated, then handed Marcus a key card. "Make it quick. I'll keep watch." Richard's office was exactly as Marcus remembered, organized to the point of obsession. Everything had a place, and everything was in its place. Marcus began searching carefully, looking for anything that might explain what Richard had discovered. In a locked drawer, which Marcus picked with practiced ease, he found a folder marked Personal. Inside were bank statements, but not for Richard and Eleanor's joint accounts. These were for an account in Eleanor's name only, and the deposits were substantial, $5,000 every month for the past year, all electronic transfers from an account in the Cayman Islands. Marcus photographed everything with his phone. $60,000 in secret deposits. Where was Eleanor getting this money? He was about to leave when he noticed something odd. Richard's computer was still on, just in sleep mode. Marcus woke it up and was surprised to find it wasn't password protected. That was unlike the security-conscious Richard he knew. Unless Richard had removed the password on purpose, wanting someone to find something. Marcus quickly searched Richard's files and found a folder buried deep in the directory structure, labeled innocuously as Tax Receipts 2019. Inside was a single document titled Insurance. His hands trembled as he opened it. It was a digital diary, Richard's record of his discoveries. The first entry was dated 6 months ago. "Found unusual charges on our credit card. Eleanor said they were for her book club, but the amounts don't match. Starting to document everything." The entries grew progressively more alarming. "Eleanor's been meeting someone every Thursday. She says it's yoga class, but she comes home smelling like men's cologne. Hired a private investigator. Eleanor is having an affair. The other person is James Morrison. My business partner, my friend." Marcus sat back, stunned. James Morrison, Richard's business partner, had stood at the funeral looking appropriately mournful. But he'd been sleeping with Eleanor. He continued reading. "Confronted Eleanor. She laughed, said I was pathetic, that James was twice the man I'd ever be. 20 years of marriage, and she spoke to me like I was nothing. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." The final entry was dated the day before Richard's death. "Eleanor came to the office today. She was different. Calm. Too calm. She apologized, said she wanted to work things out, invited me to dinner tomorrow night to talk. I don't trust her, but maybe I owe our marriage one last chance. If something happens to me, check the security footage from the restaurant. Marlowe's on 5th Street, 7 p.m. reservation under her name." Marcus's heart was pounding. Richard had suspected something might happen. He'd left a trail. Marcus quickly copied the file to his phone and cleared the computer's history. As he left the office, he texted the information about the restaurant to his own email, creating a backup trail. His next stop was Marlowe's restaurant. It was an upscale place, the kind with discreet booths and dim lighting. Perfect for romantic dinners or apparently murder. The manager, a thin man named Philippe, remembered the Hartleys. "Oh, yes, Mrs. Hartley is a regular. She was here that night with her husband. They had the booth in the corner, very private." "Did you notice anything unusual?" Marcus asked, slipping the man a $50 bill. Felipe glanced around, then leaned closer. "Well, Mrs. Hartley ordered for her husband, said he wasn't feeling well and she knew what would help. She was very insistent that the kitchen prepare his meal exactly as she requested." "Do you have security footage from that night?" Philippe shook his head. "The system overwrites every 3 days, but..." He paused, clearly debating whether to continue. Our sommelier, Marie, she served them. She mentioned something odd. Marcus found Marie in the wine cellar, cataloging bottles. She was a young woman with sharp eyes and a better memory than any security camera. I remember them, Marie said when Marcus explained why he was there. Mrs. Hartley was acting strangely. She brought her own bottle of wine, said it was a special vintage for their anniversary. But it wasn't their anniversary. I keep track of these things for our regular customers. Did Richard drink the wine? Yes, though he didn't seem to want to at first. Mrs. Hartley kept insisting, saying she'd gone to so much trouble to find it. He finally had a glass to please her. Marie frowned. He left most of his food untouched, said he felt dizzy. Mrs. Hartley helped him to the car. That's the last time I saw him. Marcus thanked Marie and left the restaurant, his mind working through the timeline. Eleanor had poisoned Richard at dinner, probably with something Patricia had procured from her pharmaceutical connections. It would have been a slow-acting poison, something that would kick in hours later when Richard was home, making it look like a natural heart attack. But knowing it and proving it were two different things. Without Richard's body, without the wine bottle, he had no physical evidence, just circumstances and suspicions. As he walked to his car, Marcus noticed a familiar figure across the street. Patricia Morrison was watching him from a coffee shop, no longer bothering to hide. She raised her cup to him in a mocking salute. Marcus decided it was time to confront the sisters directly, but first, he needed insurance of his own. He drove to his bank and rented a safety deposit box, placing copies of all his evidence inside. Then he wrote a detailed letter outlining everything he'd discovered and gave it to his lawyer with instructions to open it if anything happened to him. That evening, Marcus parked outside Eleanor Hartley's house. It was a modest two-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood. The lights were on, and he could see shadows moving behind the curtains. He took a deep breath and walked to the front door. Eleanor answered on the second knock, still dressed in black but with her hair perfectly styled and makeup flawless. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "Mr. Chen," she said with that same cold smile. "I wondered when you'd show up. Please come in." The house was tastefully decorated but felt cold, unlived in. Eleanor led him to the living room where Patricia was already seated, a glass of wine in her hand. "Would you like something to drink?" Eleanor offered, her tone mockingly polite. "I'll pass," Marcus said. "I know what happened to the last person who accepted a drink from you." Eleanor's smile widened. "Such imagination. You really should have stayed in retirement, Mr. Chen." "Richard trusted you," Marcus said. 20 years of marriage, and you killed him for what? Money? James Morrison? "Love," Patricia interjected, her voice sharp. "You wouldn't understand. Eleanor's been miserable for years, trapped with that boring little man. James makes her happy." "Happy enough to commit murder?" Eleanor laughed. "Murder? My husband had a heart attack. The police said so. The medical examiner said so. Everyone said so except you. Richard knew you were going to kill him. He left evidence." For the first time, Eleanor's smile faltered. "What evidence?" "His diary. Security footage. Witnesses who saw you poison him at dinner." Marcus was bluffing about the footage, but they didn't know that. Patricia stood abruptly, her face flushed. "You're lying." "Am I? Why do you think I'm here instead of at the police station?" "I wanted to give you one chance to confess. Turn yourselves in, and maybe the prosecution will show mercy." Eleanor's mask finally cracked completely. "You sanctimonious fool." Richard was pathetic. He wouldn't give me a divorce, wouldn't let me be happy. He threatened to ruin everything, to expose James's financial irregularities at the firm. He was going to destroy all of us out of spite. "So you destroyed him first?" "It was elegant," Patricia said with pride. a synthetic compound that mimics heart attack symptoms, undetectable unless you specifically test for it, which no one did. I still have connections at the pharmaceutical company. They think I disposed of it as medical waste." Marcus kept his face neutral, but inside he was triumphant. He'd been recording the entire conversation on his phone. "The Cayman Islands account," he said. "That's James's money, isn't it? He's been embezzling from the firm." Eleanor's face went white. "How do you—" "Richard found out about everything, the affair, the embezzlement. That's why he had to die. It wasn't just about your happiness. It was about avoiding prison." The room fell silent. Then Eleanor stood, her composure returning. "You have no proof of anything. Even if Richard suspected something, suspicions aren't evidence. And you're trespassing in my home." "I should go," Marcus agreed, standing. "But this isn't over." As he walked to the door, Patricia called out, "Mr. Chen, accidents really do happen. You should be more careful." Outside, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. They'd confessed, and he had it all recorded. But as he reached his car, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. James Morrison's BMW was parked down the street, and James himself was walking toward Eleanor's house. The three of them were meeting, planning their next move. Planning, Marcus realized with sudden clarity, how to deal with him. He got in his car and drove away quickly, uploading the audio file to multiple cloud services as he drove. Whatever happened next, the evidence would survive. But Marcus had underestimated how far they would go to protect their secret. As he pulled into his apartment complex, he didn't notice the figure waiting in the shadows of the stairwell. He was thinking about his next move, about getting the recording to Tony first thing in the morning. The attack came from behind, swift and brutal. Marcus felt the sharp pain in his neck, the sudden weakness in his legs. As he collapsed, he saw Patricia standing over him, a syringe in her hand. "You should have minded your own business," she said softly. Marcus tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come. The world was growing dark around the edges. He thought about Richard Hartley, about justice unserved. His last conscious thought was hope that someone would find the evidence he'd hidden. As Patricia dragged his body toward a waiting van, Eleanor watched from the driver's seat. She was smiling again, that same satisfied smile from the funeral. But this time there was something else in her expression. Fear. Because Marcus Chen wasn't the only one who'd noticed Eleanor's unusual behavior at the funeral, and somewhere in the city, another pair of eyes was watching, waiting, planning. The game was far from over. Detective Sarah Walsh had been watching the Hartley house from her unmarked car for 3 hours. As a member of the Major Crimes Unit, she'd been secretly investigating James Morrison for months on suspicion of embezzlement. Richard Hartley's sudden death had complicated her case, but when she saw Patricia Morrison drag Marcus Chen's unconscious body into a van, she knew she'd stumbled onto something much bigger than financial fraud. Sarah called for backup and followed the van at a safe distance. They were heading toward the industrial district, where abandoned warehouses provided perfect cover for criminal activities. She'd seen enough to arrest them for assault and kidnapping, but her instincts told her to wait. These people had already killed once. They might reveal more. Marcus woke up tied to a chair in what looked like an old textile factory. His head throbbed, and his vision was blurry, but he could make out 3 figures standing before him: Eleanor, Patricia, and James Morrison. "You're awake," James said. He was a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes. "Good. We need to know exactly what you've done with the information you've gathered." Marcus tested his bonds. They were tight, professional. "The police already have everything," he lied. "You're too late." Patricia slapped him hard across the face. "Don't lie to us. We've been watching you. You never went to the police today." "But you recorded us," Eleanor said, pacing nervously. "Where's your phone?" Marcus remained silent. They'd find the phone in his pocket eventually, but every second he could buy might help. He'd set the uploaded files to automatically forward to Tony's email if he didn't cancel the command within 6 hours. Only 2 hours left. "This is getting us nowhere," James said impatiently. "Patricia, prepare another injection. If he won't tell us voluntarily—" "No," Eleanor interrupted. "We've already made too many mistakes. Richard was supposed to be a clean death, but this private investigator has complicated everything." "Your mistakes, you mean?" James snapped. "That smile at the funeral. Patricia warned you to be more careful." "Don't blame this on me," Eleanor shot back. "You're the one who's been stealing from the company for years. Richard only started investigating because he noticed discrepancies in the books you were supposed to be managing." Marcus watched them argue, noting the cracks in their alliance. Criminals often turned on each other when pressure mounted. "Enough," Patricia said sharply. "We need to focus. Mr. Chen, I'm going to ask you one more time. Where is the evidence?" Outside, Sarah Walsh and her team were getting into position. She'd called in the SWAT unit when she'd confirmed the location. Through her binoculars, she could see Marcus Chen tied to a chair, surrounded by the 3 suspects. She needed to move soon, but she also wanted them to incriminate themselves further. The wire she'd placed on the warehouse window was picking up every word. Inside, Marcus decided to take a gamble. "You want to know what Richard discovered? It wasn't just the affair or the embezzlement. He found out about Patricia's side business." Patricia went very still. "What side business?" "The one where you've been selling pharmaceutical supplies on the black market. That's where you got the poison, isn't it? From your own illegal inventory." Eleanor turned to her sister in shock. "Patricia, what is he talking about?" "He's lying," Patricia said quickly, but her voice was shaky. "Am I?" Marcus pressed on. "Richard traced the Cayman Islands deposits. They weren't from James. They were from Patricia's buyers. She's been using your account to launder the money, Eleanor. You've been an unwitting accomplice to drug trafficking." "You stupid woman," James snarled at Patricia. "You told me the money was from discreet investors for our new firm." The alliance was crumbling. Eleanor backed away from her sister. "Patricia, tell me he's lying." Patricia's composure finally broke. "I was trying to help. You needed money to leave Richard, to start a new life with James. I did what I had to do." "By making me a drug money launderer?" Eleanor screamed. "By killing my husband?" "You wanted him dead," Patricia shouted back. "Don't pretend you're innocent. You mixed the poison into his wine yourself." Outside, Sarah gave the signal. The SWAT team breached the doors with professional efficiency. "Police! Nobody move!" The warehouse erupted in chaos. James tried to run but was quickly tackled. Patricia reached for something in her purse, another syringe, but was disarmed before she could use it. Eleanor simply stood there, staring at her sister with a mixture of horror and betrayal. As the paramedics checked Marcus for injuries, Sarah introduced herself. "Detective Walsh, Major Crimes. We've been investigating Morrison for months. You stumbled into the middle of our operation." "Richard Hartley?" Marcus asked weakly. "We have everything on tape," Sarah assured him, "including their confessions just now. They'll all be charged with murder, along with the financial crimes." Marcus felt a wave of relief. Richard would get justice after all. As he was loaded into an ambulance, he saw Eleanor being led away in handcuffs. She was no longer smiling. The trial that followed was sensational. The prosecution presented a clear narrative. James Morrison had been embezzling from the accounting firm for years. When Richard discovered the fraud, James convinced his lover, Eleanor, that Richard had to be eliminated. Patricia, already involved in illegal pharmaceutical sales, provided the poison. The most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Linda, the secretary, testified that she'd seen Patricia in the office after hours a week before Richard's death, accessing the company's medical insurance files. She'd been researching Richard's health history, looking for any conditions that would make a heart attack seem plausible. Eleanor tried to claim she'd been manipulated by her sister and James, but the recording Marcus had made proved she'd been a willing participant. The satisfied smile at the funeral, captured in photographs by other mourners, became a key piece of evidence showing her lack of remorse. Patricia's illegal drug operation unraveled completely. Investigation revealed she'd been stealing and selling pharmaceutical supplies for 3 years, using her sister's bank account to hide the profits. The poison that killed Richard came from a batch of experimental cardiac medications she'd stolen. James Morrison's financial crimes were extensive. He'd embezzled over $2 million, planning to flee the country with Eleanor once Richard was dead. The Cayman Islands account was meant to be their nest egg for a new life abroad. All 3 were convicted. James received 25 years for murder and embezzlement. Patricia got 30 years for murder and drug trafficking. Eleanor, despite her lawyer's best efforts, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge cited her betrayal of marital trust and the calculated nature of the crime. Marcus recovered fully from the attack and returned to his private investigation practice. The case had nearly cost him his life, but it had also reminded him why he'd become an investigator in the first place, to find justice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. 6 months after the trial, Marcus visited Richard Hartley's grave. Someone had left fresh flowers, white roses like those from the funeral. As he stood there, Linda approached. "I come here sometimes," she said quietly, "to tell him that we didn't forget him, that justice was served." Marcus nodded. He knew something was wrong. He tried to protect himself, left clues. In the end, that's what saved the case. "Do you think he knew?" Linda asked. "At dinner that night when Eleanor gave him the poisoned wine? Do you think he knew?" Marcus thought about Richard's final diary entry, his suspicions about the dinner invitation. "I think he hoped he was wrong. Even after everything, he wanted to believe the woman he'd loved for 20 years wouldn't actually hurt him." They stood in silence for a moment, remembering a good man whose only crime had been discovering the truth. As Marcus walked back to his car, his phone rang. It was Tony from the police department. "Marcus, we might have another case that could use your help. Suspicious death, spouse with a perfect alibi, but something feels off." Marcus smiled grimly. "Send me the details. I'll take a look." Because that's what he did now. He looked for the things others missed, the small details that revealed larger truths, like a smile at a funeral that shouldn't have been there. Sometimes the most obvious clues were hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice. The Hartley case had made headlines and changed procedures. Medical examiners now routinely tested for a wider range of substances. Police took spousal behavior at funerals more seriously. And Marcus Chen had become known as the investigator who could see what others couldn't. But for Marcus, it always came back to that moment in the rain, watching Eleanor smile over her husband's casket. That image had driven him to risk everything for justice. Because Richard Hartley had deserved better than to be murdered by those he trusted most. In her prison cell, Eleanor Hartley no longer smiled. She spent her days writing letters to James that were never answered and thinking about her sister who'd been transferred to a maximum security facility after attempting to poison another inmate. The perfect murder had turned into a life sentence. All because she couldn't hide her satisfaction for just one more day. Detective Sarah Walsh received a commendation for her work on the case. The financial fraud investigation expanded, uncovering a network of embezzlement that reached into several other firms. She often thought about that night in the warehouse, how close they'd come to losing both Marcus and the evidence. Timing, she'd learned, was everything in police work. Marcus kept Richard's final diary entry framed in his office, a reminder of why he did this work. "If something happens to me, check the security footage." Richard had known the danger he was in, but had faced it anyway, hoping for reconciliation, even as he prepared for betrayal. That was the real tragedy, Marcus thought. Not just that Richard had died, but that he'd died still hoping the woman he loved might choose him over her deceptions. The smile at the funeral hadn't just revealed Eleanor's guilt. It had revealed the depth of her callousness, the complete absence of love or regret. As the sun set over the city, Marcus Chen prepared for his next case. Somewhere out there, another victim was waiting for justice. Another family was grieving, wondering if they'd ever know the truth. And perhaps another killer was smiling, thinking they'd gotten away with the perfect crime. But Marcus had learned that no crime was perfect. There were always clues, always signs for those who knew how to look. Sometimes it was financial records or mysterious substances. Sometimes it was a pattern of behavior or a secret relationship. And sometimes it was just a smile at the wrong moment, a flash of truth in a performance of grief. That smile had started everything, had led to justice for Richard Hartley and punishment for those who'd betrayed him. Marcus locked his office and headed home, satisfied that Richard could now rest in peace. The unusual smile at the funeral had revealed a secret that 3 killers had thought was buried forever. But secrets, Marcus knew, had a way of coming to light. All it took was someone willing to look beyond the surface, to question what others accepted, and to never give up until the truth was found. In the end, Eleanor's smile had been her undoing. And Richard Hartley, the quiet accountant who'd color-coded his files and loved his wife despite everything, had gotten the last word after all.